distinguished panelists. So we're here today because we serve and participate in the LA Food Policy Council. And we want to make a little bit of a connection between the large international agricultural system and movements inside and against that system, and the work that is going on in homes and community gardens in LA. So I have been more than adequately introduced. I'd like to also introduce Edna Bonacich, who I always get your second C wrong, an emeritus professor at UC Riverside in sociology and ethnic studies, and co-founder of the Ujima Farmers Group, and Dake Scorza, who is founder of the Social Justice Learning Institute, and he and I got to work together on some school and community gardens in Inglewood. And we've had some very interesting discussions about the efficacy of community gardening as a way to change the agricultural system. And that will be sort of what we'll ping off in our talk today. So, urban agriculture, why is this a big deal? So Southern California is historically an enormously productive agricultural region. It was the top agricultural county in California before we put houses where the agriculture was. And a part of our Food Policy Council, so what is the Food Policy Council? I'll just say quickly. It's a group of many different types of people interested in food, the growing of food, the marketing of food, the serving of food, and seeking justice in all of those parts of the food system. So one of the funnest things is that we have some big Ventura County growers that are part of our group, and it's fascinating to hear what they have to say. We have some union reps in our group. We have activists in our group, and getting all the different, we have grocers, we have the LUSD school food people in the group. Fascinating to hear from them what all their thoughts are. There are 7 working groups, and urban agriculture is one of those. We get 30 or so people like yourself, some of you have been to these meetings, to talk about our part of this whole food system. So crops like the pixie tangerine, which grows in huge orchards in Ojai, there it is growing in the orchard, beautiful, very special fruit. If you go to the supermarket right next door and buy your pixie tangerines, as you'll know, that pixie tangerine has been graded and crated and transported a great distance from the orchard to return back to the produce section of that traditional supermarket. So because I know that this is the American food system, I say start, community gardens. They have no impact on helping people who are impoverished get more calorie per dollar. It's a very crummy way. I have to choose between healthcare and feeding my kids. I want to be able to get, my lowest priced food, a high number of calories really effectively. And if I go to my supermarket, I get all those calories. If I spend my time, instead of working in the community garden, then I'm not doing the best for my family. I might be able to get some co-benefits. I get have time with my family, but I'm reducing the amount of money that I get. So, what's the answer, Dake? What do you think we can do?
Well, and I would even take a little bit further and say that, in a community, in the community of Inglewood, it's a food desert, right? So, we essentially lack access to healthy, affordable, locally grown, culturally relevant, and organic foods or fruits and vegetables, right? So most of the foods that's provided to the members in our community come from the fast food restaurants. And if any of you, just quickly by a show of hands, how many of you come in through LAX? Okay, so Inglewood is the city that's right under the pathway of LAX, and attracts a lot of the travelers who go through LAX to get to Los Angeles or to generally, go in that direction. And right on the corner of Century and Crenshaw is a complex, a very large complex, called the Century Plaza, where there are at least 25 fast food restaurants in that plaza alone. And there are 3 grocery stores, believe it or not. There's El Super, Food for Less, and the 99-cent store. Well, the 99-cent store offers organic food, right? It offers spinach in these small packages for 99 cents. At Food for Less, they offer a lot of food at fairly decent prices, but horrible in the quality. You go to El Super, the food is very cheap, but the nectarines are about this size.
Yes.
Okay? So when you bite into them, or if you buy food from El Super, you actually don't taste what the fruit is supposed to taste like. So many of our residents are having to choose between these types of options. And there's also a Costco in that same plaza. And the Costco is affordable depending on your income, because there's also an affluent community in Inglewood. And in the Costco specifically, you know, if you go to purchase at a place like Costco, you have to buy in bulk. And they don't accept food stamps, so you're pretty much out of luck, right? Or you have to pay that $50 a year membership as well. So Costco is not really accessible for many of the residents. So to build upon Glen's point, there's very few places or points of access for our community members. And so the decision to choose unhealthier foods is really easy, especially when Jack in the Box is just a few blocks away from your home, right? So I don't have to walk 2 miles to get to the Century Plaza to go pick poor foods or purchase poor foods, when I can just go to the Jack in the Box that's 2 blocks away, or the McDonald's that's another 2 blocks away, or the Louisiana Fried Chicken that's another 2 blocks away, or the Chinese food store that's another 2 blocks away, right? So it makes accessing this food such a challenge. And so, you know, we've been recently talking about how community gardens can provide solutions, and we think that it's going to be more than just community gardens, right? It's going to be this collaboration between community, school, and home gardens, and the gardeners who are willing to share that food in a local food system, right? So some of the efforts that we're pushing for is a food share program, and then throughout the city of Inglewood, where people are able to collect that food. So I don't know, I'm sure many of you here are familiar with generally or roughly the average amount of food that a fruit tree produces, right? So on average, an orange tree will produce at least 800 pounds of fruit a year. Well, that's a lot of fruit. That's a lot of food that is literally being wasted in our communities on a daily basis. And we talk about food and food access and food justice, and yet have not taken advantage of the food that's being grown in our own backyards. The food that we may want to eat or maybe not able to eat because there's too much of it that's growing. And so what our organization is doing is collecting all that food and sharing it to our local residents. And I think that's going to be one of the ways we're able to change the food system and also provide access for folk who are not able to access that food traditionally. So if you're a family of 3 and you, on average, receive $180 a month of food stamps, then you have to make that stretch. Well, if you're growing food in your backyard, you can share that with your neighbors so that their $180 goes that much further.
So you're going to grow food, and you're not going to let it enter the normal food system. We're just getting in our neighborhood, we're going to find a way to divvy it up.
Oh no, I think it's going to very much enter the food system, right? I think that's the point, is to make sure this food can be a part of the food system itself, but can also supplant what we import. So I'll give you a couple figures here. On average, in the city of Inglewood, or in most low-income communities, 15 cents on every dollar stays local. In most affluent communities, 45 cents on every dollar stays local, and that's based on what you produce locally or what you import, right? So in the city of Inglewood, we're importing the majority of our goods, right? So it's a small city. It's about a $7 million tax base, and we are able to, and we're trying to think strategically about how we can keep most of our dollars locally, because you have to couple the work you're doing, the work we're doing with food production with local economic enterprise. So people have to have money to actually pay for the food or pay for the things they need, which will then allow them to pay for things like healthcare, especially if they're eating if they're having a healthier diet.
So, same question to you, Edna. What is it that our urban agricultural work has to do with helping people eat better?
Glen, can't hear you.
Okay, thank you. Same question to you, Edna. What is it that this has to do with helping people eat better?
Okay, so so I thought your challenging question was, cheap food in the agribusiness sector or in the industrial agriculture sector, and here we are, small quantities. How can we possibly feed everybody? And it's much more expensive. So I thought, wow, what a provocative question. I've certainly read it before, but I've never really been forced to try to answer it. So, so here's what I think. First of all, there's the whole question of subsidization. Okay, so what system gets subsidized and what doesn't? I just recently read a figure that said that there's about $5 million that the USDA is giving out for sort of small gardening projects of the kind that we work on. And then there's $75 billion that they spend on industrial agriculture. If there were any at all justice in this system in terms of the way money is spent and the way things are subsidized, it would be a very different picture in terms of the way costs come down to the consumer, A. Secondly, there are hidden costs in this system. And the hugest one is, of course, environmental, and that it's basically unsustainable. So the fact that it depends so heavily on fossil fuels, not only for fertilizers and stuff like that, but that it also depends on it for transportation. If you added in the social costs of having those container ships, you know, chugging across the Pacific and you know, coming up through the oceans, if you add into that the cost of those trucks that are trucking. I used to teach at UC Riverside. I could cough for you now because I still remember how bad, I mean, I have a cough, but I feel like it's eternal now that I've driven along the Pomona Freeway. I mean, just seeing those you know, those trucks belching out crap into the air, excuse my language, you know, and so there's, and all the people along those corridors are, of course, deeply affected. The railroads we think of as clean transportation, far from it. You know, they're also very polluting. So that there's all these kind of health costs, and of course, you know, the future of our planet costs, that if they were factored in as a reasonable cost, which they are, of course, they just don't show up in the market price, then we would see a very different picture. That our kind of agriculture is one that is aimed at living at peace with the earth, at renewal, at sustaining the earth, and all the healthy living that goes with that. The idea of going out and working with your own hands in the soil and enjoying the companionship of your neighbors in the process of it. You know, so on the one hand you have, you know, this industrial monstrosity, which is of course one could go off on, you know, its treatment of animals and the whole corn-based thing and high fructose corn syrup and lack of health and the whole thing. But anyway, that would be my answer.
Yeah. Well, I'm provoked. So I've heard Edna describe how a community that adopts this softer way of organizing itself around food production will have fewer of these externalized costs. Do you think in Inglewood, for example, if I were the mayor of Inglewood, would it be smart for me to say, I'm going to organize my people to have more local production of food? Why would I do that if I were the mayor of Inglewood?
Well, I guess I can't say no to that question, right?
Okay.
No, absolutely, and I think what I described earlier, I think is very similar to what's happening here in Altadena, right? So many of the residents here are actually bartering and sharing their food in local markets, and thinking through strategically what this value would be, and for someone like an elected official is really important, because a lot of the times they may not understand that, they may not see it, and it's really easy for them to say, for a mayor, especially the mayor of Inglewood, to say, no, this doesn't make sense for us because I'm focused on my budget right now. I'm focused on trying to deal with the economy and the recession, right? And so I know in our work we say, look, this is going to help us save dollars, right, in ways that are very strategic. This is going to help our residents so that they can put more of their money into their families and into their own enterprises in the community, and then think strategically about that. You know, in considering the value of urban agriculture, we have to appreciate that everyone's going to need to participate in different ways, right? So there may be a family that's able to be in a community garden. There may be a family that's not able to be in a community garden. Maybe they're just able to go in the backyard and water their garden once a day and then, you know, get their harvest every other week or two, right? And just do what they can. But I think creating more opportunity for participation is going to be very important for it to turn around the sort of industrial agricultural system.
So an opportunity for participation could be sharing your yard with another family, for example, or...
Absolutely, and I think it could be walking down the street and helping to collect the food from your neighbor's yard, right? I mean, if they're growing a bunch of oranges, go pick up that basket of oranges and then take it to the neighbors on that street.
Yeah.
You know, we've come to realize that many of the residents, especially in the African American community, the unemployment rate is constantly being thrown around with multiple figures, but specifically for African American males between the ages of 16 and 40, it's around 22%. Well, that's a huge segment of the population who's looking for something to do, right? And I think we've been very thoughtful in trying to provide those opportunities for them to get involved in these enterprises, right? Become a part of this work so that you can help take care of your community. And then that has multiple benefits for our community and for society. Absolutely.
Good. So the Food Policy Council is a loose organization. What do you think the Food Policy Council, you know, all of us working together, could we organize those people towards more urban agriculture, and what would be the benefits for all of the participants?
Okay, I'm not sure that I will
I'll
necessarily.
You know them, you met them.
You can steer.
You can talk about the vision statement and why. You know.
Oh, okay, good.
Yeah.
So really, what's happened? Actually, Alexa, are you here? So she's the food policy coordinator for the LA Food Policy. Stand up and take a bow.
Take a bow, yeah, like
She's
that.
really, she's the person that has put this together and is keeping it going. So anyway, so there are a number of working groups in it, and they're in, and we represent one of the working groups. Ours was originally designated as Growing Good Food. So this is all a good food program, and each of the parts of the LA Food Policy Council has different, you know, kind of missions about what they're trying to work on. You know, like food deserts, or like, you know, the street vending and various, you know, they're dealing with various other aspects of the food policy of the food system. So our goal, so we were designated to do growing good food, and what we've really decided to do is to focus on the idea of developing Los Angeles as a center for urban agriculture, following the model of other cities. So a number of cities, you know, San Francisco, Oakland, New York, Detroit, are all have this concept of using their own land to develop local agriculture so that they're less dependent on the industrial system and can grow their own food, and it can grow it organically and have it be part of our lives. And we think that Los Angeles, you know, provides a wonderful opportunity. Really, we should have been at the forefront of this because of our climate. You know, God, we can grow all year round. You know, everybody else is, you know, worrying about hoop houses and greenhouses, and we can just grow it. And then secondly, we have, you know, part of the, you know, we think of urban sprawl often as a curse, but in fact, our urban sprawl has a positive consequence, which is that we have a lot of land around. You know, we have parkways and we have backyards. I mean, we're not like New York, you know, we've got all these advantages. So we've just decided we really want to make Los Angeles have a concept of itself as a center for urban agriculture in which there is policy and programs in place that can make it easy to in fact grow stuff here. So that's kind of our goal. And so what we've started to do is we've started to research other cities to see what policies they have in place so that we can simply plagiarize them. And then we want to you know, also understand where the barriers are in the existing, you know, system of regulations and zoning and all the rest of it. So we want, for example, you know, there's the possibility of developing a zoning policy that says urban agriculture should be something that's zoned for. You know, instead of just plonking it on top of residential areas and saying, you know, well, we'll allow certain things to happen in people's backyards, to say, you know, that land should be set aside for this goal, you know, as a possibility. So anyway, so we have a vision statement, which I have to say, D'Artagnan mainly wrote.
No.
Did a lot of the work.
Good writing.
Yeah, so anyway, so I'm just going to read you some of this. Is that okay?
Yep.
And by the way, we have here, I may as well get this started. Okay, so we have a sign-up sheet because we're going to have to do political engagement. And so we're going to need people to show up at events at City Hall. You know, so we want to get your name and your, you know, phone number and your email address, and so that we can, you know, and hope that you're enthusiastic about this as well, and that you would be the active troops in this, as well as, we'd love to get your good ideas about it too. What we should be pushing for, what do we want to accomplish. Anyway, here we go. So first of all, there's a quote from Gavin Newsom. Urban agriculture is about far more than growing vegetables on an empty lot. It's about revitalizing and transforming unused public spaces, connecting city residents with their neighborhoods in a new way, and promoting healthier eating and living for everyone. Okay, a number of cities in the United States are developing and implementing policies that legalize and structurally support, through financing, zoning, and community engagement, the expansion of urban agriculture in their jurisdictions. A groundswell of grassroots initiatives toward growing food in the Los Angeles region have revealed a need for a comprehensive policy. That's another thing we really want to aim at, is kind of having, a sense of where all the parts of this fit together. And a set of programs that make it easy for the population of LA to engage in urban agriculture. Access to available land must be one of the first steps in such a program, which should also include zoning and regulatory streamlining. Anyway, we see this as a kind of regional endeavor. In other words, we're going to start with the city because it's the LA City Food Policy Council, but we want to move to the county and to include the unincorporated areas, and because we feel like there's a regional food system really, and that's the way we've got to be thinking about it. So this is, there's a longer thing here which will actually be on the website of the LA Food Policy Council if you really want to, read it. Let me just read you the vision and mission. Our vision is to create a world-class local food system in Los Angeles that is affordable, equitable, and environmentally sustainable. And our mission is, our purpose is to foster the development of a sustainable local food growing system in LA by facilitating collaboration, research, and policy changes. We'll engage the region in drafting, advocating for, and implementing policy that prioritizes growing, sharing, selling, and distributing of locally grown food whenever and wherever possible. Okay, just one last point I want to actually go off of what Dart said, is that, or D'Artagnan said, okay, is that we also want to make this have an economic development component. In other words, that we feel that the city will be most interested in fact, it has that element in it. In other words, where young people can get, the unemployed can find employment, where people who don't have access to food, and who are on food stamps, maybe they can have an alternative to the dependency on food stamps and other government programs. And then there's also the possibility of doing food processing of various kinds that can be, value-added kinds of activities that can make, where we can create a local economy around growing and processing and distributing food. So that we see it in part as a jobs program, as a potential for developing the economy, but developing it in a healthy, sustainable way. Rather than, so I just want to say one last thing, sorry, about the transportation involved and bringing in truckloads of food and all the rest of that. The last thing I did before I retired from UCR was I did a study of the ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach, and looked at the logistics system surrounding them. And it's amazing to go down there and to witness it. And they are very photogenic sites, but there are tons and tons of containers pouring into our ports daily. And it's just a shocking reality as to the amount of how much consumption and consumerism is dominating our lives.
I live there.
You live there, and you
I
know
live
what
in
it's
Point
like.
Furman,
Yeah.
in San Pedro.
And do you agree that it's just so? And and talk about unsustainable. It's not just the transportation being unsustainable, but that we're raping the earth for all this garbage that we're producing, and it's just being shoveled. Literally thousands of containers a day coming off of these ships into our economy, and it's just it just can't last. It's just not a way to live. We're looking for a way to live in harmony.
Provocative again. Yeah. No, not sorry at all. That's what we're here for. So is everybody ready with provocative questions? A couple softballs would be nice too. I'll ask for questions in just a minute if we're ready for them, everybody. Yeah.
And suggestions, not only
suggestions, yeah.
Yes.
I'd like to offer too that in this Food Policy Council, the participants in this this wasteful system that we've just described are really thrilled. I spoke with a very prominent Ventura County farmer who grows, let's say it's celery now. He used to have a normal farm with some celery and some tomatoes, some this and that, and now he's all celery, or no, he's all strawberries, and he's sad about that. Mm-hmm. He wishes that he could have at least half of his farm delivered to the LA market like it was in his grandfather's day. So all this revolutionary stuff we're talking about, I think we have partners we don't yet know about. And there's been a huge success recently in the school district has increased the amount that it buys locally, which got that train got started well before we were convened. But there's a lot of progress. Okay, provocative question number 1. Anybody? Yes, sir.
Is anyone growing indoors?
Okay, the question is,
not growers?
Yep. Are there indoor growers who are growing legal grain? Is the question. Yes. Let's see. I'll take that one. Oh, yeah, you go. No. I don't personally know anybody who's growing indoors except for some people that are doing this really cool fish. Aquaponics thing. I don't know if you guys.
No, we're not growing indoors yet. We have considered using aquaponic systems to help people grow in their garages or in their private spaces, but no, not yet.
Not necessarily indoors, but you don't necessarily need land as we think of it to grow food. So there are certainly a lot of rooftop gardens happening. I think downtown, I know I've done some work with an organization called LA Community Action Network. They've got a whole rooftop gardening system going. There are a number of other organizations that are doing that too. So you don't necessarily need a plot of land to grow food. And I think rooftop gardening is something that's been developed much more in New York City, in Chicago, where it makes sense because they don't have space like we have space. But in those areas where it is more dense, that's as an alternative to indoor, I think it's a little more it's more manageable than indoor gardening because indoor gardening is really tough.
Well, I have softball. I'll be nice.
Yeah. Mr. Barron.
As a donor, right, I'll probably facilitate over $10 million in in-kind garden materials in every school, LA County, some of the community gardens here too. What's been the donor response to the work you're doing? For example, the California Endowment put out the $200 million California Fresh Works Fund, which puts not necessarily gate-approvable grocery stores in food deserts, but they're going to put $200 million in donor-advised funds into combating that. What have the local foundations and the nationals, whether it's the endowment or Kellogg or Kresge, or even the government, how they responded to your work? Because I know what it takes to make a farm happen, and I haven't seen it from the local donor community.
Yeah, the Food Policy Council hasn't done a lot of fundraising yet, so we don't have anything to say really about fundraising, I don't think. The funds that we've used so far are federal community development block grant dollars, which are the same money that the Conservation Corps uses to build community gardens. So it's like we're, getting some money from our aunt who feeds all our other nieces and nephews too. It's not going to be good long term.
Well, and Mud, you actually answered you gave the answer in your question, right? So Kellogg has responded with a racial justice initiative, environmental justice initiative, and many of the foundations now are moving in this direction. So I think what I've come to see in my experience is that when a major foundation like the California Endowment moves, or Michelle Obama and her efforts have really been pushing many of these organizations around the country, everyone moves. So now the foundation world is jumping for joy over community gardens, right? And they're, in some cases I've heard of them giving away $300,000 to do 10 school gardens. And I'm like, oh my God, do you know what we could do with $300,000? 10 school, you're just doing 10? That's all I ask, that's all I think, right? So, so folk are shifting, I think, in this direction. But I think one of the challenges is making that money accessible to non-traditional communities and non-traditional spaces, right? And to organizations that are out here doing the type of work that I think we all very much believe in. It is easy to get funding when you're already plugged into the funding stream, right? But we all know, as I'm sure you've experienced, and it's really interesting because, side note, we don't do community gardens in our community in a traditional way. We built a garden this past March with the help of Kaboom and Disney. And it's an open space. It's actually in the